Robert Dawes was once described as the most dangerous criminal you've never heard of, having built a vast empire that spanned continents, evading justice for years. The National Crime Agency consider his eventual conviction as the most successful they've ever dealt with, where the trial wasn't held in the UK. But who exactly is Robert Dawes? How did he rise to power, and what finally brought him down? The man you're about to hear about was a notorious figure in the British criminal underworld, the head of a global organised crime group, a major player in the international drug trade, and one of the most influential and feared organised criminals in Europe, until he was captured at his Spanish villa in 2015. This is the story of how the NCA finally caught up with Robert Dawes. You are watching OCG TV. Chapter 1. The Early Years. Robert and John Dawes were both the generals of the Dawes cartel, based in the Mansfield and Sutton-in-Ashfield areas of England. They ran a multi-million-pound drugs empire from a small house in Tudor Street, Sutton-in-Ashfield. From 1991 until his arrest in 2005, there is no evidence that John Dawes did a single day's legitimate work. He lived almost exclusively, according to his own accounts, as a jobless man claiming benefits. His hot-headed brother Rob was operating from Spain from 2002 onwards, organising shipments of cannabis resin and cocaine, while the rest of the gang organised wholesale deliveries of amphetamines and heroin, mainly from Liverpool and Runcorn. Until 2001, they operated almost undetected. Then, police in Nottinghamshire launched Operation Normality with the help of the National Crime Squad and customs investigators. By 2003, it will receive additional resources with the sanctioning of Operation Starburst by law enforcement agencies in London. It found that the Dawes cartel was made up of three generals: John and Rob Dawes and Gary Hardy, another Mansfield man whose father had been high up the command chain of a Midlands Hells Angels gang. By 2001, this close-knit group was importing so many drugs that they had a backlog, so they began to bury large amounts underground in coded locations in woodland in Sutton-in-Ashfield. A National Crime Squad investigation revealed links between large-scale drug shipments flowing from Spain, Holland and Belgium and the cartels run by the Dawes family and the Bestwood cartel. All roads were leading back to Nottinghamshire and southern Spain, where Rob Dawes was still holed up. Officers began to take a closer look at the financial transactions of the gang. They found more than £8.5 million going through their hands between November 2002 and June 2003. In addition, members of the gang were logged on more than 40 flights coming in and out of Malaga and Amsterdam over a 2.5-year period. By late spring 2003, the Dawes cartel began to unravel as John Dawes himself was arrested. He had returned to the UK sometime previous to be more hands-on with the operation, having lost several of his troops to prison along the way. Over 9 weeks, a jury heard details of how John and Rob Dawes headed a ruthless organisation making more than £1 million a month from the illegal drugs trade. John Dawes and their father Arthur were convicted for their parts in the operation. John Dawes was jailed for a whopping 24 years, while Arthur Dawes received 8. Dawes, who had been living in both Spain and Dubai, was arrested at Dubai International Airport by local police on the orders of Interpol and Spanish police over £14 million of cocaine, which had been seized near Madrid in 2007. Although there was no formal extradition treaty between the United Arab Emirates and Spain, he was later extradited to Spain. It took until the spring of 2011 before Dawes appeared before a Spanish judge. After completing his prison term for money laundering, the then 39-year-old was flown to Madrid and remanded into custody by a magistrate. However, in September of that year, he was released indefinitely on bail by a judge at the Madrid Provincial Court. Given the fate that had befallen his brother and father, Dawes had won the lottery. Off he went into the distance, free to start up another enterprise. Chapter 2: Raising the Stakes. When the NCA was formed in 2013, one of the first cases they reviewed was the Robert Dawes file. It quickly became evident that collaboration with international agencies would be necessary. Robert Dawes shifted his focus away from local criminal activities and was in the process of establishing himself as the leader of an international drug trafficking network. The NCA collaborated closely with their Spanish counterparts and engaged with Colombian officials in Ecuador and Venezuela, as well as primarily with European partners. This included cooperation with French and Spanish authorities, alongside parallel investigations with Italian and Dutch agencies, all of whom were linked to the trafficking network established by Dawes. His operation was both complex and far-reaching, involving corrupt officials worldwide. Additionally, he utilized encrypted communication methods which posed significant challenges for police in deciphering his activities. This case marked one of the first investigations in the UK to extensively utilize encrypted communications. In April 2013, covert investigations provided crucial intelligence that ultimately contributed to the downfall of Robert Dawes. The tip-off came from NCA undercover agents who had infiltrated the Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns. The Cartel of the Suns is the term used to describe drug trafficking cells embedded within the Venezuelan military. Despite the name, it is not a hierarchical group, but rather a network of networks within the main branches of the military: the Army, Navy, Air Force, and National Guard, from the lowest to the highest levels that are frequently protected by, coordinate with, or in some cases are even directed by, political actors. This intelligence from the agents has enabled the initiation of an undercover operation in collaboration with French authorities. By September 2013, an Air France flight arrived in Paris, carrying 32 suitcases in its cargo hold. Detectives received confirmation that the aircraft had landed, and the suitcases were subsequently moved to a warehouse in preparation for distribution. It was anticipated that the contents would be divided into 4 separate shipments for transport by truck, with the first expected to reach the United Kingdom, comprising approximately 250 kilograms to be dispatched to various locations. The 1.3 tons of cocaine was split into 4 consignments to different corners of Europe. French agents followed 300 kilograms in a lorry heading for Naples. It was intercepted in Germany, and 2 representatives of the Camorra were eventually arrested and charged along with the lorry driver. This was particularly noteworthy, as one would typically expect the Camorra to be leading such operations. However, they were merely purchasing from the Dawes network, which controlled the logistics of cocaine distribution into Paris. The seizure of drugs in France was a huge success and led to a number of arrests across the Robert Dawes organized crime group. As a consequence of the French seizure, numerous arrests were made in Venezuela, totaling approximately 50 individuals, which highlighted a significant level of corruption around the activities at the airport at both sides. That bust should have been the end of it all, but it wasn't, because Robert Dawes was still a free man. More had to be done to connect Dawes to the trafficking operation into Paris. Over the course of 2 years, the NCA gradually assembled a comprehensive understanding of Dawes' operations, including the structure of his network, the individuals involved, their connections, and the decision-makers within it. This analysis ultimately informed their strategy for apprehending him, which directed them to a hotel in Madrid in 2015. At that point, the Guardia Civil had been tracking Dawes' communications. However, the advanced encryption of his system rendered their telephone intercepts inefficient. Consequently, they opted to revert to fundamental methods, implementing continuous physical surveillance. This approach led to the identification of an important meeting scheduled at the luxurious Villa Mania Hotel in Madrid. With only a few hours to prepare, a plan was swiftly devised to establish surveillance. Robert Dawes wasn't in Madrid for a holiday or a city break. He was there on business. Serious business. He was meeting with two foreign nationals, a Colombian called Cepeda and a Venezuelan national called Rincon. Cepeda was quite a high-level member of the Cali Mafia from Colombia, while Rincon was a lower-level criminal. The Guardia Civil faced an immediate challenge. How could they monitor what Dawes was saying to his business associates and record that evidence in a busy hotel lounge? At that time, the NCA were using recording devices, so they knew that if they got close enough to him, they could record his conversation to add to their growing intelligence. In the recording made that day, Robert Dawes can be heard bragging about the Paris seizure, telling his associate that it was the biggest job his crew did last year.
Crashed. It's all over the news. You don't see it?
Yeah, well, I saw it as well.
It's the biggest one they ever have.
And that's given to you?
From Venezuela. It's the biggest one they ever did in Paris, to Paris.
To Paris?
Charles de Gaulle. Yeah,
Here nowadays,
see? If he goes to, and if he knows anybody in Venezuela, they know that story. That's the biggest story they last year. Every fucking police involved from Europe is talking to Venezuela. Many people have problem in Venezuela.
It was a eureka moment. They had a 2-hour discussion talking about their whole criminality. Dawes was talking about what he did, who he did things with, high-level corruption across the globe, and how he did things. Dawes broke his own golden rule, which was not to brag about these things. The significance of what he had done was massive. Had that conversation not taken place, he would have been in a strong position in court to defend himself. What followed was due to a change in Spanish law. Although the recording had been lawfully obtained, a recent constitutional court ruling meant that it was no longer admissible. However, when a new law was passed, the Spanish were finally able to share the covert recordings with the French after all. Finally, the arrest and the prosecution could go ahead. Chapter 3. The time has come. The Spanish took the arrest of Dawes extremely seriously. They arranged a dawn raid at his home in Benalmádena, a town on southern Spain's Costa del Sol. A huge number of officers in ballistics gear and even an armed Hummer was deployed. They also raided a huge estate owned by Dawes in nearby Coin, which boasted a purpose-built lake containing fish worth up to £400 each. He successfully arrested and eventually extradited to France. However, due to the terrorist attacks in Paris, his trial is delayed for over 3 years. Dawes was not quite ready to lay down and take his punishment though. In court, Dawes had paid his counsel to introduce forged documents into his own defence. There's a document there that purports to come from the Spanish judge, saying that the recording wasn't legal at the time as an effort to get the case thrown out, because he knew that the whole recording was pivotal in terms of his guilty finding. He maintained that he and his family made their money from a variety of businesses in Spain, including furniture and window manufacturing, management consulting, and property investments. When the audio footage of his conversation with Cepeda was played, Dawes surprised the judges by saying the claim was only a ploy to end what he called heavy-handed surveillance by Spanish police by getting himself arrested. Asked why he had then stayed behind bars for 3 years while his wife and 3 children remained in Spain without telling investigators that the claim was fake, Dawes said his lawyers had advised silence while appealing the video's admissibility. His claims were dismissed and he was eventually sentenced to 22 years in December 2018. Of 2 other Britons on trial, Nathan Wheat was convicted of 6 charges and jailed for 13 years, while Kane Price was acquitted. 3 Italians were also convicted. Dawes would later get 5 years added to his sentence for the forged document. Interestingly, the operation to take down Dawes also successfully targeted another suspected associate, Roy Livings, who was arrested in July 2014 after 167 kilograms of pure cocaine was seized from a Gibraltar-registered boat Gloria of Grenada, moored in Sines, Portugal. Livings was the director of several businesses registered in the UK that sell encrypted SIM cards for mobile phones in Belgium, Holland and Spain. A previous director of one of the companies was Najer Bobo, who was assassinated in October 2012 as he left a hotel in Antwerp, Belgium. He was a major player in the European underworld, and his murder set off a wave of 14 tit-for-tat killings in Holland and abroad. Dawes continues to protest his innocence, with a well-produced blog being updated regularly on his case. While Dawes reflects on his past choices and the consequences that have shaped his life, the question remains whether this chapter truly marks the end of his criminal career.